Hello again, this is Marcia Sinitar, and welcome to part 2 of The Mentor's Spirit. My interviewer is Tami Simon. Tami is the founder of Sounds True. Many of her interviews are online, and I think you can purchase from Sounds True other kinds of recordings, other kinds of interviews. I want to say that there was very little editing that I had to do on this recording, both part 1 and part 2. And that's because of Tami's intelligence and her depth of understanding, her intuitive ability to draw out from me the depth of my thinking. I think this illustrates the mentor's spirit, actually, as I'm describing it to her and with her. For one thing, when we have a shallow interviewer, it doesn't tap into, that interview does not tap into our depths. It kind of closes the door on the spirit of what we have in our heart. On the other hand, when we have a deep, perceptive person interviewing us, dialoguing with us, talking with us, conversing, mentoring us, in that case, it taps into something deep, resonates with our heart. And I think that's illustrated in this interview. So with that said, I think it's a perfect interview for those of us who are helping professionals, priests and pastors and spiritual directors, perhaps even life coaches. Enjoy.
Marcia, your approach to mentoring seems very unique. You're not giving us 10 steps to follow or 5 tips and 4 pieces of advice. You're more talking about the underlying spirit of mentoring. And I wonder if you can describe more this unique approach that you have and how you see it as different.
Right. I guess you could think of my presentation on mentoring as a philosophy of mentoring. And also it's a way of providing a big, broad framework for people. And essentially I'm saying the following, that there are mentors, and the mentor is defined as a guide or a person that holds certain wisdoms, like we've heard the expression wisdom keeper, the elder of a community, we could think of it in that sense, a teacher. But there's also something else, and I think it's this something else that makes my work different. And that something else is the mentor's spirit. And the mentor's spirit is a life-affirming influence. So it could be an idea, could be a book, could be a piece of music, it could be almost anything. And that spirit pervades healthy organization. That spirit pervades healthy relationships between, let's say, teachers and students, managers and subordinates or other people, politicians even, leaders and their constituents. And when it's absent, we find an erosion of optimism, erosion of what we could even call street smarts, the ability to solve problems. We're going to be hearing a lot these days about mentoring. We already have started to hear a lot. And unlike the linear or more regimented approaches where you hear people saying, well, let's have the mentor have a contract with the mentee, I'm saying, before we get to that, let's take a look at the underpinnings of what makes a healthy mentoring relationship. And is it possible that we could even teach young people, old people, anybody, how to look deeper at what's happening when they get information about how to live, how to be, how to work, how to grow as a person? I think that's a bigger picture.
It seems almost that you have a distaste for codifying the rules of mentoring. Is that true?
Well, no and yes. Let me give you the no first. The no would be to say, I support any attempt to upgrade what we now have in our communities, organizations, in our global relationships, which is pretty much nothing. We don't have systems set in place where people feel comfortable seeking information, seeking wisdom, let's call it, or skills, or giving it. So there's a little bit of awkwardness right now. So in that sense, I think we're going to have to become a society where we give permission and perhaps even some instruction to people. On the other hand, I would say that without the proper philosophical base, intentional base, to guide these relationships, to guide the taking in, the receiving of information or wisdom or skills, usually these just become dead systems. And if I could just add a point to that, in organizations we very often see the best of intentions around such things as giving employees feedback. So there's these elaborate systems that are put in place. Every manager will speak to every employee once a year, twice a year. They will give feedback. It's in writing. We believe it. We're this kind of organization. When push comes to shove and you look at these organizations, very rarely is the spirit of the program in place. So that some people go through their whole working lives without ever really having had a good two-way dialogue with the people that they work with. That's what I'm trying to say. Let's avoid that with mentoring. It's too important.
Now, in taking a look at mentoring, that's different than the traditional look of here's a set of skills I want to learn from a specific person who's going to be my mentor in that craft, and expanding it as you do to practically anything. It seems a book could mentor someone, a painting could be a mentor, a cloud even, or a sunset. Doesn't it almost make the idea somewhat meaningless if anything can be a mentor? I mean, a particular tree stump could mentor me in something.
Yes, in that sense it does, unless you think back to the definition that the mentor is a person. So a tree stump cannot be a mentor. A person who is a guide or a teacher or a keeper of certain sacred knowledge. The mentor's spirit, on the other hand, could be a tree stump, could be a cloud, could be anything. And let me give you some examples, because now we're talking about the mentor's spirit. On a live radio show, when I was going around the country promoting a book that I wrote on movies and spiritual aspects of film viewing, a single mother called up and said that her daughter, about age 9 or 10, who was a Down syndrome child, had been watching coming-of-age films by popular actresses of a certain period, Shirley Temple and like that. And not only would she watch them once, but she would beg her mother to rent them so that she could watch them many times. And the mother concluded that her daughter could not take in information verbally, not even through the mother, but that something about the pictures, something about the energy of the film was able to instruct her in how to be a young lady as she got to that age. Now this is to me the mentor's spirit, because there's no one person teaching her. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Another example like that is about John Muir, who at the time of his life, he was one of the foremost conservationists and of course an author, and we have his works today. Not many people know that he was savagely abused when he was a boy by his own father. His father had been a Scottish farmer and used Muir as a kind of indentured servant. And once, for example, he put him down a well shaft with instructions to dig out the shaft until they found water. Well, that Muir did. He must have been 9 at the time. And the water rushed in on him in the well shaft, and he almost drowned.
Wow.
So until he could summon the strength to run away from home, nature was his mentor. He would go out, and he wrote about this in his autobiography and letters. And he said, for example, one time, "I'm feasting in the Lord's mountain house, and what pen could write of my blessings?" In other words, something about nature was healing to him. He later said in a letter to someone else that he felt that most people don't realize when they're being mentored, and that sheep, a storm, a person, almost anything can mentor us. So in that sense, it's the way I'm meaning it, that the mentor spirit pervades our life if we only know how to look.
Now, why is it so important to you to make this distinction between specific human beings who serve as mentors and what you're calling the mentor spirit?
Well, I think for one thing, it's important for young people, children, individuals who feel at a loss. I think it's important for all of us to have our consciousness raised, our awareness raised to the enormous wealth of opportunity in the culture itself, through art and plays and music and friendships that are not formal mentoring programs, by which we get assistance and life-affirming influences. So in that sense, I think it is very important for us to speak to one another about the uplift that we get from non-traditional means, non-formal, regimented relationships.
One of the things that I've noticed is I've been mentored by various books and writings, and the writings have been extremely helpful to me and influential. But then I've gone to research more about the author's actual life and found lots of contradictions.
Right.
And then have had to reject that person as a mentor figure once I find out that they died of alcoholism or sexually abused their students, or the list goes on and on. What do you think about that feeling of disappointment?
It's such a wonderful question. It's so rich with potential. First thing I would say, it's so natural to reject the person after we've been disappointed by them. This is natural. On the other hand, if we put our faith in the spirit of what the person is teaching us, the ideas that had value, and not put so much weight on the person, the value of the person, it helps alleviate the disappointment. I think there is a danger to putting our trust in persons, especially from a distance where we don't know them, where we have yet to test them out in various relationships. I think there is not so much of a problem in weighing the ideas that we're told, weighing the value of their contribution to our life in the sense that I'm speaking about, the mentor's spirit. I'm thinking, for example, there was a story about a guru who would refuse to let the disciples or the seekers make her their authority figure. And she would say to them, "You harm yourself when you give away your power to me." And then she would add, she'd say, "You harm me too, because you choose not to see me as I am." Let's let us off the hook, us leaders, us people who would be mentors of others, in that sense. This is not to say that we don't try and strive to be better than we are today. But no one is perfect. And to think that another individual is going to be our knight in shining armor or our ministering angel, this is probably a mistake.
So your recommendation would be, if there's somebody whose work you found valuable, but you find faults in certain aspects of the way they live their life, to still honor the teachings you've received from them?
I would always honor the teaching, and there you have some objectivity because you can stand back and you say, well, let me assess the value. Let me evaluate rationally how this works, how this idea fits in with truths that I hold sacred. On the other hand, when we project, and I think it is a projection, I call it carrying a big bag of baggage. When we project our expectation, idealized for the most part, onto the person, and then even with close friends, we do that sometimes. In fact, most of the time. Then we get around what Robert Bly calls that rattle. There's a kind of rattle in us. Things are not going right. We feel uncomfortable. Something about how they're behaving is not meshing with our frozen, idealized picture. There's where I think the problem comes in. But to take the idea, to assess the idea, to integrate it, assimilate it with ideas that we have chewed up and made our own as our truths, this I think is healthy.
Do you think in a sense then that you can choose little segments of people that you want to have serve in your life in a mentoring way? Maybe only 5% of this one little quality this person has that I want to incorporate into my personality.
Yes, I think that's beautifully put. I think what we do, all of us, unconsciously perhaps, and the more conscious probably the better, is make a patchwork quilt of types of people, functions, habits, mannerisms, attitudes that we admire. And then that patchwork quilt we somehow stitch together until it becomes our own. I'm thinking recently that I heard Tina Turner, the singer, speak on Larry King Live. She was being interviewed about her success and how she got where she got. She's gone through many, many hardships. And Larry King asked her who she admired. And she said that for years and years she admired Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. Now here's a rock star and a wife of a president who seemingly on the surface would have nothing in common. And yet, as Tina Turner was describing this, she was saying that there was something about Kennedy Onassis's dignity, her refinement, her politeness, many things, her intelligence, that she admired. That's part of that patchwork that I think we all do. And imagine how helped we would each be if we knew how to do this, if we knew how to be good stitchers of our own little quilt.
Well, in a sense, it seems like it has to be a patchwork job because no other person is you.
That's right.
And that this is a big focus of all of your work has been helping people find what's unique about their calling.
What's unique about their calling, and to be bold in identifying themselves as they are. In other words, to say first, before the other can define me, I will define myself for the other. I exist in this following way. I choose to be thus and such. So it's this phenomenon of self-definition that has been so important, played a very important part in my life, in my work with other people.
Now, would you distinguish your discussions of the mentor from some ideas that people have about who are my heroes and heroines? Or as you speak about who's mentored you in your life, are you really thinking about people that you consider heroes and heroines?
Well, let me answer this way. The persons that have mentored me have been very human. This goes back to your question about being disappointed. Rarely have I not been disappointed by some of the people that, in fact, were my mentors and continue to be. But I'm sure they were disappointed in me. So in that sense, they're not heroes or heroines because they have not been idealized. I do know them as the saying goes, up close and personal individuals. Heroes and heroines, I think, tend to be 2 or 3 steps removed from us. We often refer to them as being larger than life. And yet, having said that, the mentor spirit, that life-affirming influence, pervades all such encounters. Even a film, certainly books, a line of poetry, carries that life-affirming influence. And so in that sense, both the mentor person and the hero or heroine, 2 steps removed, idealized version, can be influential to us.
Now, you've been using this phrase, the life-affirming spirit. And it's interesting because I think some of the people that have mentored me in the most influential ways are the people that I've seen go through very, very hard times. And in a sense, they've survived and come out the other side. But I wonder what you think about that, being mentored by people who have successfully gone through deep depressions, for example.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that that is exactly what I mean by life-affirming. It's the rising up out of the dust of our despair. It's the enduring the horrendous trial. The person who survives the Holocaust, for example, who lives to tell about it, and in so doing teaches us something about what we need to survive. Having said that, I would like to add that I think each of us, it's like that patchwork that we were speaking about, each of us takes what we need from the mentor or from the person that we're looking at to say, what's my next step? What kind of a person am I? How is it with me right now? What kind of an individual do I want to become at my best? It's that kind of thing. So to look at someone who has gone through a depression, who has survived the death of loved ones, who has been abandoned or homeless, and who has lifted themselves up, to me is purely life-affirming. It basically says, yes, I exist, I am, I will continue.
What about for the more religiously oriented person studying the lives of saints? How do you think that fits into mentorship?
Oh, I think it's so important, being one of those religious persons myself. First, I think the saint, the artist, the poet, the person that is somewhat off-center to normal society, the mass mind of society, the customary program, is helpful to all of us because they show us in one way or another what it is in us as human beings that calls to us, if I can put it that way. For the religious person, for the artist who looks at, let's say, the saint or the gifted artist, respectively, there is a way of saying, what's possible for me? Eric Berne, the father of transactional analysis, used to say that one way you could tell about your own life script, he called it a script, and he conceived of a program of life very much like a play, theater. He said one way that you can find out about your own script is to ask yourself, what happens to a person like me? So you kind of get a sense of where you are now and where you're going and what your program is. But I would say, in the spiritual sense of your question, that we could also say, what happens to someone like me at their spiritual best? Now, this is different. This is not to say I'm stuck where I am, but rather there is an infinite possibility for me. And yet, even within that infinitude, I prefer this particular life. I prefer these values, this metaphor, this form. And so we find our way.
Do you think it's a question of what you prefer or uncovering what you feel is, quote-unquote, your destiny?
My sense, and again, I think this is very personal because people come at this with different subjective experience. My sense, it's a blending of both. At best, optimal. I think we prefer to be what we are. And our destiny involves the display and the progressive unfoldment of what we are. This is our destiny. I think the most unhappy people that I've met are individuals who are somehow confused about what that is. Who am I really? You ask the question, they go unconscious or become unhappy because there's so much static, there's so much fear about meeting up with that part of themselves that they fear it. And usually what it is they fear is themselves at their best. Most of the time, even for those who say they fear failure, the more powerful image that is threatening, menacing, kind of too much for me to accept is the image of self at their best.
Why is that? Why is that so many people are afraid of that?
Well, I think it has something to do with power, and I think it has something to do with responsibility. With power, it has to do with such things as, I can't believe that I have this much control, or this much say, or this much potential. It's too powerful for me to accept. And it relates to responsibility, because if I am that capable, if I am competent, I will have to be responsible to it. That, I think, is the crux, that we would prefer not to be responsible. We would prefer to have the other tell us how to do it. Here again is why I don't like lists of things to do. I am your supposed mentor. Now let's you and I have a contract. Give me a list of what you want, and I'll give you a list of answers. This, to me, avoids the real relationship, the real guiding responsibility for me to be sensitive to what you present, for you to be bold enough to ask for what you want, for you to take responsibility for trusting me, for me to be responsible enough to live up to your trust. That is the mentoring relationship.
Now, you talked at the beginning of this program about the various cross-currents that existed in your own life, tendencies towards solitude and, at the same time, tendencies towards wanting to make a contribution in the world.
Right.
And because of these cross-currents, you felt, in particular, a need for mentoring.
Right.
But don't you think that, well, first of all, that all people feel some level of inner contradiction, pulls in different directions?
Yes.
And don't we all need mentoring?
Yes, absolutely we do. For one thing, we know that when young people, children in particular, but also groups, lack optimism, they tend not to last as long as those individuals or groups who do have a sense that, if some problem comes up, we know how to handle it. We know how to grow. We have a system for handling this or that dilemma. These groups and organizations, too, that have a system for enlivening the solution finding of the group seem to endure. What we see now in our culture, this speaks to the idea of the importance of mentoring everywhere, every group. What we see now is a kind of waning of that optimism. There was a study recently reported in USA Today, I think it was in February '97, and they talked about young people and the sense of optimism that they seem to be losing. Now, it isn't a great deal. We're not looking at a huge dip, but it's enough. And we see enough evidence of that in our own communities that it's worth taking a close look at. And the other thing I would say is that mentoring goes on whether we like it or not. If you look at gang leaders, what you see in gang leaders are some of the same gifted traits as business leaders. They have influence, they have power, they have followership, they are articulate on a certain level. They may be leading young people who follow them astray, in our point of view, but nevertheless they're providing something that those young people need. And what is that something? It's that mentoring relationship. It's that I'll show you how to make it through.
Do you think that in other societies at other times this mentoring relationship was better understood than it is now?
Yes, it was better understood. It was not only understood, it was revered. So you would have the elder in the community, and as that elder took his or her place, certain obvious gifts were coming into play. The person was a medicine man or woman. The person understood the mystery of childbirth and was a kind of midwife to the process. The individual was a good hunter. I mean, I'm just idealizing and romanticizing what I have read. But it does seem to me that those individuals who were functionally effective within the life of the community became responsible to showing others how to be functionally effective. I think what we have in our society today, we have some of that, but we also have a great romance with being helpless and being lifted up out of our helplessness by some dominant, knowing-it-all other. So the relationship is much more black and white. It's I know and you don't know. Whereas in the more so-called primitive communities that I've read about, there's a kind of collaboration going on. The younger person comes with a respect for the questions that they're asking, fully expecting the individual to talk to them about it, to show them certain secrets. But then there's always this idea that the younger person is going to become equally strong, equally knowledgeable, equally responsible for sharing that, not just exploiting it, running off and making $1 zillion with, this is how you make it in marketing and sales.
It's interesting in your discussion of the mentor spirit, you talk about how children and young people can actually mentor older people quite successfully. And I wonder if you could say more about that and maybe give an example in your own life.
Well, I can give you a current example, and I'm not sure that this is exactly mentoring, but it is close to it. And that is that I'm learning now to use a new computer. It's more complicated than the one I did have. And I'm enjoying it very much. And the person that is helping me is a 16-year-old who has his own business. He's taking a year off between high school and college. He was raised by a single mother, I believe, studied at home, homeschooling, and he has that kind of dignity and nobility that I was speaking about earlier. Another example, when I first became a teacher, this was years and years ago, they say your first class is the one you'll remember all your life. And I would have to say in the first few classes that I had, primary students, I saw a part of myself that I had hidden because I had been on my own since I was young, after my dad died. And this is the mentoring spirit. Now, they weren't individually mentoring me, but there was something about their spontaneity, their enjoyment of the moment, their love of learning, their trust of me, their love of me, that awakened in me those same traits, and I saw them as myself. So it goes back to what we were saying about projecting. Very often we can see who we are by who we admire. Gary Wills, in his book on leadership, says that if you show him your favorite leaders, he'll show you who you are. I think we could say the same thing for mentoring. You show me who your mentors are, I'll show you who you are. And that's what I mean by that.